and welcome to episode 64 of Toke Signals TV, where we bring you the biggest in cannabis and hemp news stories every week. I'm Steve Elliott, your host at TokeSignals.com, and I'll be guiding you through the news. First, let's look at our Toke Signals bud pick of the week. We have a pretty white widow flower for you here. Took this at a secret garden somewhere in Washington. She's 5 weeks in the flower with about 3 weeks to go. And as you can see, she's right on track. Let's do the news now, shall we? We had a huge week in marijuana news due to the midterm elections. So let's get all of that under our belt now. First of all, in Oregon, victory at the polls where voters made that state the third in the U.S. to legalize marijuana. Yes, and now there are 3 Oregon voters on Tuesday chose to make their state the third in the U.S. to legally regulate the production, distribution, and sale of marijuana. Passage of Measure 91 accelerates the nationwide momentum in favor of legalizing marijuana and ending the drug war, according to proponents. With Oregon and DC coming on board, it's clear that Colorado and Washington voting to legalize in 2012 was no anomaly. Tom Angel of Marijuana Majority told Hemp News on Tuesday evening. The trend is clear. Marijuana prohibition is coming to an end. As 2016 approaches, we can expect to see many more ambitious national politicians finally trying to win support from the cannabis constituency instead of ignoring and criminalizing us, Angel said. The new regulatory system will be overseen by the Oregon Liquor Control Commission in consultation with the State Department of Agriculture and the Oregon Health Authority. It will allow adults over 21 to possess up to 8 ounces of marijuana and to grow up to 4 plants. DUI and public consumption will still be illegal, and localities may ban marijuana businesses through ballot measures. Revenue from the measure will first go to oversight of the industry and then to schools, mental health and drug treatment services, and local and state law enforcement. It's always an uphill battle to win a marijuana legalization initiative in a year like this when young people are so much less likely to vote, which makes today's victory all the sweeter, said Ethan Nadelman, Executive Director of the Drug Policy Alliance. The pace of reform is accelerating. Other states are sure to follow, and even Congress is poised to wake from its slumber. Having spent years as a prosecutor, I know that Oregon will benefit greatly from regulating marijuana and that the example set here will influence future states in 2015 and beyond, said former Assistant State's Attorney and Oregon resident Inge Franklin, a member of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. The results will likely boost efforts in California and other states to end marijuana prohibition 2 years from now. It's likely that several other states, such as Massachusetts, Maine, Nevada, and Arizona, will also join California with legalization measures of their own in 2 years. Oregon's law reportedly sets a new gold standard for marijuana regulation. It applies the lessons learned from the first 2 states to legalize marijuana, Colorado and Washington, while combining many of the best elements of their laws. Revenues, including both tax revenue and an immediate $71 million in annual savings in law enforcement, are expected to be $100 million per year. That's according to a 2012 study by Harvard economist Jeffrey Mirren. Unfortunately, the measure's provision that ends the criminalization of possession for personal use doesn't take effect until July 1st, 2015. On that date, people will finally be able to legally possess and cultivate a small amount of marijuana at home. The state has 13 months to implement regulations for production and sales, so it'll be significantly longer before people can purchase marijuana in a store in Oregon. Some activists have worried that Oregon could once again, as it did 2 years ago, turn down a legalization measure at the ballot box. After all, more conservative rural Oregonians in past elections haven't been particularly friendly to weed, and conservative voters supposedly have more say on statewide issues than in their northern neighbor Washington, where 55% of voters approved Initiative 502, that state's laughably anemic legalization law back in 2012. In Alaska, they became the 4th state to legalize marijuana just hours after Oregon became the 3rd on a very exciting election day. Alaska on Tuesday became the 4th U.S. state to legalize marijuana, joining Oregon, where voters had approved a legalization measure earlier that same day, and Colorado and Washington, of course, both of which legalized in 2012. Measure 2, which was approved by 52% of Alaska voters, allows adults 21 and older to possess up to 1 ounce of cannabis, grow up to 6 plants at home, and transfer up to an ounce at a time to other adults without remuneration. State licensed growers, cannabis product manufacturers, and marijuana retailers will be regulated by the Alaska Alcoholic Beverage Control Board or a separate agency created by the legislature. Now it's been shown that putting marijuana legalization on the ballot can succeed, even in midterms. We can expect to see a huge surge of additional states voting to end prohibition during the 2016 presidential election, Tom Angel of Marijuana Majority told Hemp News early on Wednesday. And because the issue has been proven to be mainstream as far as voters are concerned, we may even see lawmakers in several states jumping ahead to legalize marijuana legislatively in the meantime. This is a historic day for public safety and for civil rights, said Seattle Police Chief Norm Snapper, retired, of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, LEAP. Clearly, the people demand change, and their leaders would be wise to follow. The results are in, and marijuana prohibition is on its way out, said Rob Campia, Executive Director of the Marijuana Policy Project. From Alaska to Maine, voters are calling for more sensible, evidence-based marijuana policies. Americans are fed up with wasteful and ineffective laws that punish adults for using a less harmful substance than alcohol. The folks trying to keep marijuana illegal are relying on the same scare tactics today that they have relied upon for decades, but voters just aren't falling for it anymore, Campia said. The results are particularly encouraging since voter turnout during a midterm election is typically smaller, older, and more conservative. Clearly, support for ending marijuana prohibition spans the political and ideological spectrums. Proposals to regulate marijuana like alcohol are headed for the ballots in at least 5 states in 2016, and they're being considered in legislatures around the country, according to Campia. This year's election was a large step forward, but the 2016 election will be a huge leap forward, ending marijuana prohibition in this country once and for all. Marijuana will be taxed $50 per ounce in Alaska collected from the growers. If production costs fall as expected, that could eventually amount to a rate of 100% or more, which will likely encourage higher potency weed. Public consumption will remain prohibited in Alaska and is punishable by a $100 fine. The language will likely prevent people from legally consuming cannabis anywhere except in their homes. Enjoying this newly legal product will therefore likely be problematic for marijuana tourists. Like Oregon's legalization law approved earlier the same day, Alaska's new pot law doesn't change the DUI rules for marijuana. Under current law, blood test results can be used as evidence that someone was driving, quote, under the influence of marijuana, but without a per se standard of impairment, such as Washington State's, where drivers are considered automatically guilty of DUI marijuana when their blood level of THC exceeds 5 nanograms per milliliter, an amount, incidentally, which science hasn't shown is associated with impairment. This measure will establish, license, and regulate retail stores, cultivation facilities, product manufacturers, and testing facilities so consumers will know that what they're getting is safe. It will allow police to focus on violent crime, and it will ensure that profits benefit the government, not drug cartels, according to LEAP. Driving under the influence and public consumption will remain illegal, and employers may restrict their employees' use, and localities can ban marijuana establishments, though not private possession nor cultivation. And in the District of Columbia, the nation's capital votes to legalize marijuana. In an exciting and ironic twist to America's 77-year-old war on marijuana, the voters of Washington, D.C. on Tuesday decided to legalize marijuana in the nation's capital. Voters approved Initiative 71, a ballot initiative that legalizes possession of up to 2 ounces of cannabis for adults 21 and older and allows individuals to grow up to 6 marijuana plants in their homes. With marijuana legal in the federal government's backyard, it's going to be increasingly difficult for national politicians to continue ignoring the growing majority of voters who want to end prohibition, Tom Angel of Marijuana Majority told Hemp News Tuesday evening. I've been saying for a while that 2016 presidential candidates need to start courting the cannabis constituency, and now the road to the White House quite literally travels through legal marijuana territory. D.C. laws prevented the ballot initiative from addressing the taxation and sale of marijuana, but the D.C. Council is currently considering the Marijuana Legalization and Regulation Act of 2013, a bill that would tax, regulate, and strictly control the sale of marijuana to adults. This was the first legalization campaign in which the racial disproportionality of marijuana enforcement played a major role, according to Bill Piper, Director of National Affairs for the Drug Policy Alliance. Initiative 71 sets the stage for the D.C. Council to create a new model for legalizing marijuana, one that places racial justice front and center. Drug Policy Alliance and its sister organization, Drug Policy Action, provided significant financial assistance and played a leadership role in the Initiative 71 campaign, coordinating efforts around coalition building, voter outreach, and advising on the drafting of the law. DPA's policy manager, Dr. Burnett, also co-chaired the initiative's campaign. DC, which has the highest per capita marijuana arrest rate in the United States, has taken a series of steps to reform its marijuana policies over the past year. African Americans make up about half of DC's population, yet they make up 91% of people arrested for marijuana possession, even though black and white people use and sell marijuana at similar rates. Statistics like these prompted the DC Council to pass one of the most far-reaching decrim bills in the country earlier this year, replacing criminal penalties for marijuana possession with a $25 fine. But even under decriminalization, data from the Metropolitan Police Department revealed that 77% of tickets were written in communities of color. The people of DC have voted in favor of ending racially biased marijuana prohibition, said Dr. Burnett. The harms caused by the war on drugs are not fixed with this vote alone. The real healing begins with the DC Council developing a tax and regulate system which is based on racial and social justice. Today, the people have spoken, and right in the shadow of the Capitol have stated unequivocally that they want drug policy reform, said Major Neil Franklin, retired Executive Director of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. Tomorrow, each congressperson must choose how he or she wants to be remembered in history. As someone who respected the people's wishes and worked to end one of the most pernicious problems of the 21st century, or as an anachronism, like those prohibitionists who refused to see the writing on the wall in the 1930s. Now, to take effect, Initiative 71 must be transmitted to the Congress through the DC Council, where it will face 60 days of congressional oversight. And if Congress doesn't take action on Initiative 71, it becomes law. But that leads us right into our next story, unfortunately, where in DC, a House Republican has vowed to block marijuana legalization in the nation's capital. One House Republican said on Wednesday that he'll do all he can to block implementation of the marijuana legalization measure approved by District of Columbia voters on Tuesday. Representative Andy Harris, a Republican from Maryland, said marijuana's federal classification as a Schedule I drug should be enforced in the district. Harris, a doctor by training, blasted the legalization vote as detrimental to adolescents. Actions by those in D.C. will result in higher drug use among teens, Harris said. I will consider using all resources available to a member of Congress to stop this action so that drug use among teens does not increase. The congressman seems a little bit confused about how things work. Currently, of course, black market drug dealers don't ask teens for ID when selling marijuana. Licensed cannabis retail outlets would ask for ID. Residents of and visitors to the nation's capital, 21 and older, will be allowed under Initiative 71 to legally possess up to 2 ounces of marijuana and to grow up to 3 cannabis plants at home. D.C. Mayor-elect Muriel E. Bowser said she would vote for the measure and would see to its implementation. She agreed with the D.C. Council that the district must now take the next step of writing a measure establishing a system of retail sales and taxation. The initiative, of course, will have to pass this 60-day congressional review period. It will become law unless Congress blocks it and the president agrees that the measure should be halted. Congress has only revoked D.C. laws 4 times through the veto process, but Republicans have needled the district's heavy Democratic majority by attaching provisions to federal spending bills that prohibit the district from spending its own money to implement liberal social policy. After D.C. voters approved medical marijuana in 1998, the GOP used amendments to federal budget bills to block its implementation for 11 years. Republicans have also blocked abortion spending and restrictive gun control rules in the city. Initiative 71 passed overwhelmingly in the district. Voters approved it by more than a 2-to-1 margin. Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton, the district's non-voting member in the House, said she would fight attempts by Harris and any other Republicans to roll back marijuana legalization in D.C. She said she found Harris's interference with an initiative stimulated by racial injustice to be particularly objectionable. The people have spoken, Holmes Norton said. Initiative 71 is not just about the legalization of marijuana. It addresses an intolerable racial disparity in our city that has crippled the life chances of countless African Americans and Hispanics. And in Florida, It wasn't all good news across the board in the election. Medical marijuana narrowly failed at the polls in Florida. Florida's voters narrowly rejected the legalization of marijuana for medicinal purposes. A big majority of state voters voted in favor of medical marijuana, but state law requires that a 60% majority approve any amendment to the Florida Constitution. Florida's medical marijuana amendment needed 60%. It got just over 57%, so it narrowly failed. The campaign was among the most expensive ballot measures in the country. Millions of dollars were spent on both sides. 20th century reefer madness myths were pulled out and aired as fact as part of the misleading tactics used by the No on 2 side, funded largely by Las Vegas casino billionaire Sheldon Adelson. Florida lawmakers had passed a very limited CBD-only medical marijuana law earlier this year to allow non-psychoactive strains of cannabis for epilepsy patients. But Amendment 2 supporters argued a more inclusive law was necessary to make medical cannabis available to a broader group of patients. Covered conditions would have included cancer, AIDS, Crohn's, Parkinson's, or other conditions for which a physician believes that the medical use of marijuana would likely outweigh the potential health risks, but would not have allowed patients to operate a motor vehicle under the influence, consume marijuana in public or on the job, and would not have required insurers to pay for the treatment. Beyond the political repercussions, which at the very least mean that it will be years before many patients in the Sunshine State have safe access to cannabis, the saddest part of Amendment 2's failure is the fact that patients, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, will die as a result of this unenlightened vote. People for whom medical marijuana could have represented a better quality of life, an increased ability to be in the moment with their families and loved ones, may not get that chance. While it's disappointing that patients in Florida won't be able to find legal relief with marijuana just yet, tonight's result does show that a clear majority of voters in the Sunshine State support a new direction, Tom Angel of Marijuana Majority told Hemp News. We didn't get the 60% needed to pass medical marijuana as a constitutional amendment, but patients and their supporters will keep pushing until the law reflects what most voters want. The campaign this year faced several key challenges, including that it took place during a midterm election in which turnout dynamics don't favor marijuana reform, Angel pointed out. Next time medical marijuana is on the ballot, organizers should put patients and medical professionals at the forefront of the campaign, rather than relying on a well-meaning but much less sympathetic political donor as the chief spokesperson. A tremendous majority of Floridians voted to legalize marijuana for medical purposes today, and that's what really matters, notwithstanding the fact that the initiative will not be implemented, said Ethan Nadelman, Executive Director of the Drug Policy Alliance. Today's vote is a confirmation of medical marijuana's broad support across the political spectrum and sends a powerful message not just to Florida legislators, but also throughout the South and even nationally. In the United States, a roundup of the election reveals that voters across the country accelerated the momentum to legalize marijuana and end the drug war. Now, we've seen marijuana legalization measures, of course, passing in Oregon, Washington, D.C., and Alaska, but there were also groundbreaking criminal justice reforms passed in California and New Jersey. This election day was an extraordinary one for the marijuana and criminal justice reform movements, according to Ethan Nadelman of the Drug Policy Alliance. Oregon proved that Colorado and Washington were no flukes. And of course, with Oregon and Alaska both legalizing, we now have 4 states in the U.S. plus the District of Columbia, which have legalized marijuana. Now, California voters on Tuesday took a significant step towards ending mass incarceration and the war on drugs by approving Proposition 47. They did this on the heels of reforming the state's 3 strikes law in the 2012 election. They overwhelmingly voted to change 6 low-level nonviolent offenses, including simple drug possession, from felonies to misdemeanors. New Jersey voters approved public question number 1 to reform that state's bail system. This will reduce the number of people behind bars for low-level drug law violations and ushers in broader bail reform because it is linked to comprehensive legislation already signed by the governor that overhauls the state's broken bail system. And in Guam, medical marijuana initiative there won by 56%, making it the first U.S. territory to approve a medical marijuana law. Guam is quite conservative politically, and it has a significant U.S. military presence. So this resounding victory is another confirmation of medical marijuana's broad support across the political spectrum. Finally this week, in the United Kingdom, sheep munched through $6,300 worth of marijuana, which had been dumped in their field. Yeah, a flock of sheep in England got an unexpected treat last month when they munched on thousands of dollars worth of marijuana, which had been dumped right in their field. These animals were happily stumbling about after eating 7 bags of cannabis with a reputed value of about 4,000 British pounds, which is about $6,300 American, reports The Telegraph. The flock reportedly found the marijuana stashed at the edge of Fanny's farm in Merstham, Surrey. My sheep, being inquisitive, had an interesting feast on it, said farm manager Nellie Budd. They weren't quite on their backs with their legs in the air, but they probably had the munchies. They haven't had any other side effects, but I'll tell you about the meat next week, Bud added. At first I thought it was someone's hedgerow rubbish, Bud said. I went down to collect the bags so the sheep weren't eating black plastic. When I got there, I realized it was a form of herbal cannabis plant, Bud said. They were very strong in scent. I have no idea how they got there, Bud said. It's right next to a road and the footpath is quite open. It is extremely irresponsible for whoever dumped these illegal plants in this way, said investigating officer Detective Constable David Fair. We are doing all we can to find out how the drugs came to be at this location and who is responsible for growing and discarding the plants. The sheep, meanwhile, reportedly won't be charged for destroying the evidence. Until we see it again next time, stay lifted.